Job 33. But now, Job, listen to my words. Pay attention to everything I say. I'm about to open my mouth. My words are on the tip of my tongue. My words come from an upright heart. My lips sincerely speak what I know. The Spirit of God has made me. The breath of the Almighty gives me life. Answer me then if you can. Stand up and argue your case before me. I'm the same as you in God's sight. I too am a piece of clay. No fear of me should alarm you, nor should my hand be heavy on you. But you have said in my hearing, I heard the very words, I am pure and I have done no wrong. I am clean and free from sin. Yet God has found fault with me. He considers me his enemy. He fastens my feet in shackles. He keeps close watch on all my paths. But I tell you in this you are not right, for God is greater than any mortal. Why do you complain to him that he responds to no one's words? For God does speak, now one way, now another, though no one perceives it. In a dream, in a vision of the night, when deep sleep falls on people as they slumber in their beds, he may speak in their ears and terrify them with warnings, to turn them from wrongdoing and keep them from pride, to preserve them from the pit, their lives from perishing by the sword. Or someone may be chastened on a bed of pain with constant distress in their bones, so that their body finds food repulsive, and their soul loathes the choicest meal. Their flesh wastes away to nothing, and their bones, once hidden, now stick out. They draw near to the pit, and their life to the messengers of death. Yet if there is an angel at their side, a messenger, 1 out of 1,000, sent to tell them how to be upright, and he is gracious to that person and says to God, spare them from going down to the pit. I have found a ransom for them. Let their flesh be renewed like a child's. Let them be restored as in the days of their youth. Then that person can pray to God and find favor with him. They will see God's face and shout for joy. He will restore them to full well-being. And they will go to others and say, I have sinned, I have perverted what is right, but I did not get what I deserved. God has delivered me from going down to the pit, and I shall live to enjoy the light of life. God does all these things to a person twice, even 3 times, to turn them back from the pit, that the light of life may shine on them. Pay attention, Job, and listen to me. Be silent, and I will speak. If you have anything to say, answer me. Speak up, for I want to vindicate you. But if not, then listen to me. Be silent, and I will teach you wisdom. So Elihu has told Job that there are many ways that God speaks, that he is speaking, and that we're not perceiving it. Now one way, now another. And he goes through dreams, and he goes through illnesses. Illnesses? What do you mean God sends that? What do you mean God's speaking into that? Yeah, that's what he's doing. And when people are not listening, he sends his prophets and he sends his servants, and people don't like what they have to say. It's not going to be a sweeter message than all of the things that you've ignored. It's going to be a harder message to hear. No one has ever liked what the prophets have to say. And I'm not talking about the world. I'm talking about Israel. I'm talking about his church. Those who speak that language and are supposed to know better, they have never liked what he has had to say. They have always killed the prophets. And the word tells us they're going to kill his prophets again, and they're going to celebrate when they've killed them. In the last couple of weeks, I was told, God doesn't speak to me that way, or God wouldn't speak to me that way, when I was reproving 2 people. God doesn't speak to me that way, and God wouldn't speak to me that way. I've been told on this channel to stop with the destructive teachings that I teach about, when God is speaking to us through illness, when we haven't been listening, and he increases his voice because we're not listening. Not because he's bad, because we're bad, because of the evil in our flesh and the wickedness in the people who are supposed to be his church, who don't seem to understand that God most definitely sends all things. And the crazy thing is, I was told this by 2 people, one who lost custody of their children to someone they identified to be a narcissist. So who's in charge of that? Who's sovereign over that situation? The other whose roof caved in, literally. Who's sovereign over that situation? Because God's speaking, but people are not perceiving what he's doing. God says your enemies will not rule over you. You will be prospered. You will live in the land in safety. So when these kinds of things are happening, is God speaking or not? Is he dealing with you or not? Because it just so happens that God does speak that way. God would speak that way. And when you're not listening to him, he sends his servants to speak that way too, in a way that you don't want to hear. There was a woman who did some really nice things for Elijah. She made a room for him, and Elijah wanted to bless her, and he said, in the next year, you're going to be holding a baby. This time next year, you'll be holding a baby. And the woman had a baby, and that baby became a child, and that child got sick and died. And you know what she said to Elijah? What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son? Our children do not have the ability to defile themselves at a certain age. Like, they don't have the ability to do that with knowledge. As they become older, then they start to have understanding about what they're doing, and they have the ability to defile themselves. But an infant doesn't have that ability, for example. And I've been speaking with someone today who's going through this situation, trying to understand, okay, what went wrong? Where might things have gone awry? Not that long ago, I spoke with a friend about her child who had been sick because she had been doing something. She had introduced something to her child that she actually thought was Christian and realized it was not. And her child started to suffer. He started to have physical issues because he'd been exposed to something that was not good. That was not good for him to be ingesting into his heart. You know, we can do this without even knowing it. And it seems that the majority of people, except the only people I know who even talk about this are the people I've been working with. I don't hear anyone talking about this. And yet it was well understood in the word. It was well understood to the extent that the apostles asked Jesus, did this man sin or did his parents sin that he was born blind? Just so happened in that particular case that Christ said neither his parents sinned nor did he sin that he was born blind. This was done in order to reveal the glory of God. So in that situation, it was different. But the apostles were not confused. They knew that illness was the result of defilement. Illness was the result of sin. And you know why they knew that? Because there was no illness or disease prior to God bringing that on the Egyptians. And in Exodus 15:26, he said, if you listen carefully to the Lord your God and do what is right in his eyes, if you pay attention to his commands and keep all his decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. And then in Leviticus, he began to teach people, now if you have something going on with your skin, you have something on your skin, you go to the priest and you have him look at it, you have him take notes as to what's going on, whether there's white hair or black hair or pus or whatever it is. And the priest didn't make a diagnosis. He would tell them, go into isolation for 7 days. When you're in isolation, you're returning to God, by the way. That's well established in the Bible during Passover. Ridding your house of yeast, which represents sin. And then when that person came out of isolation after 7 days, the priest would take a look. And if they were getting better, they would go back into isolation and finish what they started with God. And if they weren't, they were cast out of the camp. Why were they cast out of the camp? Because today we would say, well, that's not their fault. They're sick. Don't you understand science? Why did God establish that? Because if they weren't getting better, they hadn't returned to God. Because God established that if you return to him, he will heal you. If you humble yourself and turn from your wicked ways and repent, he will heal you. So there was an understanding in the Bible. The people of Jesus' time understood why they were sick. And Jesus said, when he would heal them, he would say, now sin no more, or something worse will happen to you. Therefore, what has happened to you now has to do with sin. When people would approach Jesus, they would say, if you're willing, make me clean. Jesus rebuked the towns in which he performed miracles where people had not repented and returned to God. And he said it will be worse for those people than it will be for Tyre and Sodom and Gomorrah on the day of judgment. Because if the miracles he performed in those towns had been performed in the other towns, they would have repented long ago in dust and ashes. And then Jesus explained that when a spirit goes out of a person, when a spirit is cast out of a person, it goes through arid places looking for rest and doesn't find it. It comes back and finds the house it left, you're a house, swept clean and unoccupied. Why is that house unoccupied? That house is unoccupied because that house has not returned to the Lord. That house has not repented. That house is not fanning into flame God's Holy Spirit. And so that spirit brings with it 7 more spirits more wicked than itself. and the final condition of that person is worse than it was at the beginning. So it will be with this wicked generation. So what is science, you guys? What is the field of mental health? What is all that garbage? What is the nonsense that's being taught in counterfeit Christianity today? Why am I being accused? Why am I being blamed for speaking what God tells me to speak? Why am I being accused of teaching a destructive teaching that is 100% biblical and being told that I must not be from God because that's not the way he speaks to you? That's not the way he would speak if you knew his voice. I mean, I literally was told that because that person acknowledges they don't even hear from him. What's going on here? Do you understand that these are the ways that he spoke in the Bible and these are the ways he's going to speak, and you know that these are the ways his servants are going to speak too? Or have you sold out to some sissy version of who God is in a counterfeit church? Because that counterfeit Messiah is not going to save you. That counterfeit covenant, that counterfeit gospel, they are not going to save you. 1 Corinthians 15:2, by this gospel you are saved if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you, otherwise you have believed in vain. So if what you believe and what you're saying is not consistent with what God has been doing for thousands of years from the Old Testament to the New, if that's not what you're speaking with, if that's not what you believe, you have believed in vain. You understand that the word is saying that God sends disease and illness. He sends grief and suffering. He doesn't send it willingly. We see that in Lamentations 3:33, but he sends it. He sends it because it's necessary to get our attention, because it's necessary to tame his children who are unruly calves. If you don't perceive the ways that God is talking, if you don't believe that God is sovereign and that he sends everything, and therefore you ignore what he's saying and what he's doing in your life, you're going to suffer greatly. You are going to experience really intense suffering because he is going to accomplish his will. He will not lose any of those who have been given to him, and those who are being given an opportunity, those who are being called. They're not going to stand there and say, well, we didn't know. Why didn't you call us? Why didn't you, get our attention? He's not going to have you saying that. You're going to know what he's been doing to get your attention. You're going to know what you spurned. You're not going to make him a liar. And there's this version of God that's being taught in counterfeit Christianity, this image of God that's being taught in counterfeit Christianity, where he just goes and nuzzles the lamb and, scoops him up and come back on the path. But you know what? Sometimes the way he gets you back on the path is by bringing you pretty darn low, is by bringing wrath. And don't you tell me that God's wrath is not for his people. That is, you need to read Deuteronomy 28 and Leviticus 26 if you believe that. God's great wrath is not for his people. That is the context. Judgment has begun with his house. There's some wrath going on. And if you're reading the Bible, then you will see that he talks about all the things he's going to do. And then he says, and then I will relent. That's called wrath, guys. He brought me to the brink of death. The problem is the people are not perceiving the way that God's talking. They're making up a story about what's going on here, like they're victims of something, instead of actually looking at the judgment that God has brought in their life and acknowledging that and repenting, and then he will restore and heal them. You have to perceive the ways that God is speaking. He's speaking in your dreams. He's speaking in your afflictions. He is sending these things. No one else has the power to send them. He is sending these things. He's not out to lunch. He's not overwhelmed with all his God duties. He is sending these things. If you have an affliction, if your children are afflicted, you need to examine and you need to return to him. You need to look at what's going on. What have you brought into your home? What have you allowed into your family? Is God bringing a curse on you that is now going to affect the third and fourth generation? You understand? He will curse to the third and fourth generation of those who hate him. He will bless to the 1,000th generation of those who love him. The way you're living your life affects your kids. And that is not a destructive teaching. That is biblical. If you think that's a destructive teaching, you are on the wrong team, because the only thing that is destructive too is the agenda of Satan to keep you in bondage. What I am teaching you is biblical. You need to return to God. You need to examine yourself. You need to turn from the things that you're doing. You need to be restored by his Spirit. And if you don't know what that is, you need to do a fast so that you can learn what that is. When you are restored to God's Spirit, you are going to feel it. You're going to know. You will feel peace, because God's Spirit, the only place that peace comes from, peace does not come from mindfulness meditation in the world. Peace comes from God's Spirit alone. If you don't have peace, you don't have his Spirit. You have not been restored by his Spirit, which means that you need to do a fast, and you need to pray, and you need to examine yourself and remove all idols from your life so that you sit with him for 3 days. There are many videos on this channel that talk about fasting, that talk about why we fast. All you have to do is go to the channel and type in the word fasting or fast or beginning your healing journey, things like keywords, and the videos will come up. There's not a lot of time for God's people to make a decision to come in. I've talked with you about that. I've talked with you about that fourth trumpet that is coming, and I've talked with you about the fifth trumpet, after which no one repents. So you don't have very much time to come in, and so God is going to be afflicting people and their children. Why is he going to do that? Because if you're not listening to him, his voice needs to get louder, and it's not because he's bad. It's not because he's evil, and it's not because he's cruel. If you look at the bigger picture, then you will understand that what God is doing is bringing you in so that you don't end up forsaking your salvation. You can't call that cruel, and you can't call that evil, because God cannot be tempted by evil. He knows what is good. So your attitude needs to be that anything that's happening in your life, don't start saying, why can't I catch a break? Don't say that. That attitude is coming from your heart. What you need to be understanding is that God is contending with you. What you need to be understanding is that God knows what is good. And that's exactly what he's doing with you. What is good? Now you need to respond. Please discern this message with God.